Okay, here's a quick video showing how the tips show up in the reports when you do distributions. So we have gratuities and tips. I'm on that page. To get there in your layout, go into administration, go into finances, and then gratuities and tips. And from here, you'll see a list of tips that have been received within the date range, and you can change that under the advanced search. So this is between May 13th, August 13th, and it'll show a list of them. And then it'll show whether or not they've all been paid or whether they're unpaid. So unpaid just means that the payout part hasn't been marked. So you would do that by clicking the payout, and that's undo payout, for example. And so it'll be unpaid, but if I had gone and distributed everything and then paid it out for each of them, it will update this to paid to staff. So then it'll look more like this instead, where this one paid to staff, right? And it'll say paid to on July 4th, for example. So this payment would reflect in the user stats for July 4th if that shows up in the date range for them. Now, down here, staff cumulative tips. This shows basically the total that has been received. So if they've, if Adam was assigned to, in this case, $5 worth of tips, and he's been paid out 5, and to be paid is null because he's been paid for everything. In this case, this Culver account, they've received 7, they've been paid out nothing, and they're to be paid 7. And so if I go up here, it'll be one of these. I'm not sure which one. No, not that one. Not that one. So it must be. Well, so of course, it's the last one. There we go. So on this one, so they have 7, but they have not been paid out. So I would have to click that paid out, and then what that would do is that would move this 7 over to paid out. It would show up here when I refresh. This one here, Fantech, so they've received nothing. So what we'll do is we'll distribute some for them, and then you'll see that show up there. So if I go Fantech, and we have dollars to distribute, as you can see here. So we'll distribute the 3, we'll save that, and then boom. So now they're listed there. And if I refresh now, and there we see the $3 for Fantech is now in the total received. To be paid is 3 as well because they have not been paid out. So I will go back and I will edit that to paid out, for example. So pay out, so it's been paid. And then if I refresh, so we have 3 total received, paid out 3, and to be paid 0. So that's basically how you would mark those off in terms of distributions and payments. And the really important thing to note is the date ranges here have nothing to do with the invoice dates or the payment dates. It has everything to do with the distribution dates. Reason being is that you could make an invoice, a month ago, and it gets paid today, and they leave a tip today. So showing that the distribution, the dates for the distribution on when they actually get distributed makes more sense than when the invoice is created or when the invoice is paid, and so on and so forth. Just because of the way people do, different things within the organization, some pay out tips, a month later, or so on and so forth. So essentially, whenever you want their tip distributions to show up is when you should do the distributions. Now, if you have commission users on an invoice and they're assigned after 4 hours of a tip being received, it will distribute them for that user, or for the users that are assigned as the staff commission users. There is going to be a toggle in the future where you can disable that, and then you'll have to manually do distributions on your own. But of course, that's, like I said, only if you have staff that are assigned as commission users. And what it'll do is an equal share split between all of them. If there's a penny difference, it will add it to the first one. So they could end up getting a penny more because it has to, divide it in some way that you can actually distribute it, right? You can't do half a penny. But basically, the important thing to note is that the dates on here are for the tips that the staff receive are based on the distribution dates. The tips that you see show up here are based on when the tip was given. So there's 2 different dates that you're working with. The first being the date that the tip is received for the business, and then there's the distribution date, which is when you distribute this to your staff members. That's when it will affect their distribution date, and that's what shows up here. So it will show as distributed in their table here on the date that you make the distribution. So similarly, if I delete this one, and then a month from now, I go and distribute that $3 again to Fantech, it won't show up on last month, it'll show up when I do the distribution. So if I delete this now, and it's in August, and then September, I go and I re-add the $3 to Fantech, if I do that in September, it will not show up in August, but it'll show up in September because it was distributed in September. And then I can mark that distribution as paid, and that will essentially affect the September stats. So in this case, because I added the $3 to Fantech, I added that now in August, it shows up in August's report saying that he's supposed to get $3 distributed to him, and then I would pay it out. Now, for most typical cycles that we see is that staff members are paid weekly their tips, and in some scenarios they're paid daily as well. It depends. There's businesses that do it all different types of ways. So that's where the best thing to do is when you're going to be doing distributions of the tips, a good thing to do is you can set this right away as soon as the invoice is created, or even the next day, or whatever the case may be. And then once you set that, then you can manage your payouts differently by just selecting longer date ranges that suit the way you guys are doing business. So for example, every Sunday we set up the distribution, so or they're automated, of course, if you have staff members set as commission users, and you can edit those, so it'll automatically, if there's 3 staff, it'll do an equal share amongst all 3, but if only one of them is supposed to receive the tip, then just you'll delete the other 2 and then assign the rest of the balance to the single staff member that's to receive it. And then essentially what you would do is, so let's say you go and you say, okay, every Sunday we're going to do our payouts and everything like that and organize who gets what and send them out. Well, then what you would do is all the invoices for that week, that's the time range you'd be looking at for the distributions that were automatically made for them. Unless you're manually doing them, like I said, then you would just manually do those throughout the week as tips are received, or you could, do them for the entire week or whatever the case may be. And then that's the chart stats you'd want down here is where, let's say it was on a Sunday, let's say it's, today, it's on the 13th. So then what you would do is you would change the date range to the 13th and 13th to see what each one is to be paid, and then basically you would mark those ones paid out. But it definitely is easier on a case-by-case basis, just because of the way that the distributions work. So it's easier to go in and say, okay, we've got to pay them out this, boom. So we owe them $7 for that one, and mark it paid, so on and so forth. So when you're marking these as paid, you'll want a larger date range than you would this one, I would assume, in most cases, because you're going to have tips that maybe were received, like more than a week ago, but you did your distributions on the same day or something like that. So you'll need to see tips for a larger date range here when you're marking them as paid versus when you're doing it from here.